Hey, I wanted to highlight something really important Leah was talking about. And I know some of you know this already, but I think it's important for the average person to realize how important this is. It seems like a small nuance, but in assets, you have a custodian, okay? And then typically what's been happening with these tokenized funds, like let's pick on Tether, for instance, okay? So Tether, they would have a custodian, let's call it T-bills, right? Okay, so you have a T-bill custodian. Tether is going to, let's say you give Tether $1,000 US, okay? They're going to send you 1,000 USDT. They're going to take those $1,000, and their temporary custodian would be a bank, but then they would buy T-bills, and then there's a custodian for those T-bills, okay? So what would happen is if Tether got in trouble, and let's say they misallocated something, or their systems went down, or they went bankrupt, okay? You're holding $1,000 of UST. So basically, here I am down here as a user, then you've got Tether here, and then you've got your custodian for the treasuries, okay? Assuming they bought the treasuries. That's a whole different subject, but, and that's kind of a sticking point because they're going to regulators and saying, hey, we can tell you we got audited, we know they're there, but let's, institutions aren't going to trust that necessarily, okay? Probably not at all. When they go out of business, basically, you technically have an indirect claim because, they gave you USD, they gave you $1,000 of USDT, and then, hey, Fa, and then, my daughter just walked in. So basically, when they go out of business, yes, you kind of have an indirect claim, but you don't have a claim on the assets at the custodian level. So, anyways, I'm going to let the girls grab their toys and leave real quick. So that is a humongo distinction. So I'm the user down here with the USDT. You've got Tether here and then the custodian. What ABXX did, they basically took out the tokenizer, okay? So you can still use a tokenizer, but as far as I understand, and you know what, if you probably watch this video 2 years from now, I'll probably explain it differently because I'm learning this stuff all the time because I think everybody's learning right now how to do this stuff because it's so complex. But basically, if your tokenizer would go out of business, you actually have claim not through the tokenizer, but directly to the custodian of the asset, whether that's gold, whether it's a money market fund, whether it's some kind of other real world asset, whether it's, a fund. And you know what, to Leah's and Dave's point, there's all sorts of problems with settlement layers and money market funds with the timing. And in addition to that, if you tokenize a whole fund, or you tokenize a building, they can be completely different with how the rails go through. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's a direct claim on the asset at the custodian level. What does that enable you to do? As long as the infrastructure is there, it enables you to move around your tokenized asset at the speed of light, inter-jurisdictionally. She said something very interesting that I suspected. I'm not a market infrastructure guy by any means, but it makes sense. I suspected this. Leah said there's about 3 to 5% cash, liquidity, collateral, whatever you want to call it. Let's call that grease, in an engine. You grease up your tractor and I grew up with some tractors on the farm and, you want to make sure, the hydraulics can slide well and all that stuff. So we grease them up every few months to a year, right? What happens if you take that 3 to 5% away? That changes the entire global market liquidity. Okay? So here's how I think about this. This is just a guess. This is back in the napkin. I've got nothing to substantiate this. But there's about 1 quadrillion assets on the earth, right? So, and you know what? How do we measure that? What currency do we measure it in? It's hard, right? That's 1,000 trillions, okay? What percentage of that is actually liquid? I don't know. I need to look it up again. It's probably between 100 trillion and 300 trillion, somewhere in there, okay? And capital markets are probably under 100 trillion. Okay, if we're taking 3 to 5% of that, oh, that's a lot of money. So, I'm not saying ABXX is going to capture all this. Let's just dream as a whole, though. The parties that are going to put this infrastructure in and remove that 3 to 5% grease, are they going to charge 10 to 30 basis points versus 300 to 500 basis points? So 100 basis points is 1%. Right now, we're losing 3 to 5%. So let's average out, call it 4%. You know, if I had 4% locked up in my liquidity system as a very large institution or an LNG producer, so forth, and someone came to me and said, hey, I will charge you between 10 and 40 basis points, and then you'll unlock the other 300 and whatever percent, I'd sign right up. So, and then the other big key that I think Leah pointed out that I don't want you to miss is it's under current regulations, number one, okay? And they built it within the same systems because I'll be honest with you guys. So our family, we hold and held digital assets. It was an accounting nightmare. When we first started out, we cross-collateralized things. We put them in so many different LLCs. It was a nightmare, and it took like 3 or 4 years to unwind, okay? So what we ended up doing is, yeah, we use multi-sigs for some of our Bitcoin, but then we used, platforms like Coinbase. But we had to, we actually, in full transparency, we own part of this business now because they helped us so much. But Node 40 would pull the data from our blockchains and aggregate, and it would tell us, our cost basis, taxes, and track everything. Okay, they're actually the only company in the world that can fully index the Solana ecosystem. So very, very complicated software. Your average institution never going to do that. So we had to sign up for new accounts, get new accounting systems in place. It was just ridiculous. Okay. What's really, really important not to miss is Leah said something very important. The institutions don't have to stop using the current systems, okay? I don't know the implementation plan, obviously, what ABXX is trying to do, but I do know this. If you can come in and say, hey, Mr. Institution, Mrs. Institution, there's this new money market tokenization product, and we think it's going to give you a significant competitive advantage in the marketplace, that's a big deal. Oh wait, you don't have to change much? That's a big deal. So here's what really, really, really excites me, and I don't know how far this is away. I am very, very passionate because, growing up, I had a lot of resources, not necessarily financially, but, if I had a question, I could find the right person. We were in a small town of 25,000 people, and my family was very connected. So I could call somebody up and said, hey, I don't know the answer to this. Help me out. What really excites me is I'm passionate about younger people and educating about finance. I also have friends in Nairobi, Kenya, and we would ask them, hey, do you have exposure to the U.S. stock market? Can you get exposure to T-bills? Can you get exposure to gold? The answer is no, 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 and no. The minimums are so high, and a lot of times there's regulatory rules prohibiting them from doing this. Now, I realize you still have to jump through regulatory hoops, but if we can get to the point where you can tokenize, let's say, gold or a T-bill, and they can have a wallet, my friend can have a wallet in Nairobi, Kenya, and they can have $5 of a U.S. Treasury and they pay yield on that, that's actually life-changing. I worked with a young lady recently. She had $80 on Robinhood, and she was so proud of that. And, a lot of these funds, and I'll tell you what, it's a market infrastructure thing. There's a lot of funds with, you'd have to have like $3,000 minimum. And you know, maybe to an upper middle class person or the 1%, you know, $3,000 isn't that much, but it excludes much of the world for these products. And some of these really high-end products, 50, 100,000, several $1 million minimums. Like I was on a call last Friday with a fund out of New York, and they had this very, very interesting product, $6 million minimum to get into that product. So that's because it's not necessarily, I don't think it's necessarily people are gating people on purpose. It's just the friction is so high to get into some of these products. It's a white glove service. It's very expensive for them. They can't serve someone putting $5 into that product. And I think what tokenization really, really allows with full digital title, ID++, it's basically, it allows the everyday person across the globe, not even here in the United States. Our poor people are so rich compared to most of the world, to be honest. You know, to have $10 in a wallet in the middle of Africa is a big, big, big deal. It's a big deal. And I've been in situations where $10 was the difference between someone getting, you know, food that they needed or water or transportation and not being stranded. And, you know, we don't think about those things very often in the United States because of the infrastructure we have. And, yeah, so I'm very excited about that. Gosh, there was another point I wanted to make. I don't remember. But it's just super, super exciting where this is going. Oh, yeah, I remember. So the key to all of this is you have to have verifiable identity, and then you match that identity with an asset, and then that frees that asset to go anywhere in the world, okay? I don't know if you all have ever transferred shares from a brokerage account before. One time we were transferring shares from Vanguard to Charles Schwab. It took a month. It was ridiculous. And it was paper application. So a lot of these business accounts, it's ridiculous. It takes us a couple of months to get accounts, okay? And so what I'm guessing they were doing in the background, changing custodian, verifying it was us, going through all this stuff. It is absolutely ridiculous. If you can do that cryptographically, oh, buddy, watch out. Just watch out. So I'm excited on two fronts. One, I think this is going to revolutionize how commodities are traded, how the collateral moves. And, hey, can you use a tokenized stock fund or tokenized money market fund or tokenized gold or tokenized real estate as collateral? As collateral. That's a big deal, okay? As collateral in a liquid market, I think it's going to democratize a lot of the collateral in investing tools globally. Because when you think about it, what's holding back Africa from developing? Probably coming from corruption and third world, first world countries taking advantage of some of that stuff. That's kind of a rabbit hole I don't want to go down. But if you drill down to the core problem, a lot of it has to do with collateral and countrywide infrastructure. And, do people have access to assets? How do they use their assets? Just imagine, what if you had an acre of ground in the middle of Ghana and you could use that as collateral and do some things with it? Hopefully someday that'll be possible. I know it's going to be possible in a theater near us in developed countries. But also, what does that taking the 3 to 5% grease out of the system do to the whole ecosystem? Will it bring prices down? Velocity of money will increase. We used to use Western Union to transfer money from the United States to, let's say, Africa. Oh man, that was expensive. Now we can use layer 2 on Bitcoin and do it for a couple cents, or we could send, some Solana. So there are some great use cases to blockchain, but, on an institutional front and on a global infrastructure front, your title has to be married to that, and that title's got to be married to actually an identity. and it's got to be a verifiable identity. So I know that was a pretty long rant. I thought it was going to be 2 minutes. Now we're 15 minutes in. But so the key things to remember is FDT, full digital title, is not a claim on, you know, the middleman, the tokenizer. It's a claim on the asset with the custodian. Don't forget that. And then if you can marry your identity, verifiable identity, to the asset, then that frees the asset to move around. And then the grease deal, you know, taking the 3 to 5% of extra liquidity buffer out of the market. That's a big deal. They do that because the systems are so complex, and you know, if you're trading back and forth, it takes settlement time. So if you can rebuild how or rethink how that settlement layers processes actually execute without the extra grease, watch out. It's going to be exciting. So the point is, I don't know how much of this market ABXX is actually going to capture. It could be most of it. It could be half of it. It could be 10% of it. The point is, I think that this market is between $1 and $4 trillion of market cap value, whoever captures it, okay? So let that sink in. Let's call it a $3 trillion opportunity. Let's say ABXX captures 10% of that, $300 billion company, okay? That's how we think of it. It's not investment advice. This is just my personal opinion. I'm not going to talk about stock price, but that's just how I think of the pie on the global level. If it's a $3 trillion opportunity, and guys, that's not much when you're talking about 1 quadrillion of assets. You know, 10% is 100 trillion, 3 trillion. It's 3 basis points. Let's see, 10%. Yeah, 10 trillion. Yeah, I am right. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. So, and can they charge more than 3 basis points? Sure they can. It's a service that's really, really important, but obviously, you know, we're not going to pull all 1,000 trillion onto, well, maybe we tokenize it all eventually, but let's just pull it back and say 100 trillion is going to be put into this system. You know, are we going to charge 30 basis points, 3 trillion? 300 basis points possibly. Let's see. Yeah, so you can kind of do the math. I don't think anybody actually knows at this point. You know, let's call it 200 trillion. You're looking at, I don't know, it's just a humongo opportunity, and I'm just excited to be, you know, from the sidelines involved in it. So, a couple thoughts for you.